They said nothing was left, that her family had been completely erased in a single night, but no one noticed the way she stood there afterward silent, unbroken in a way that didn't make sense. Sirens faded, neighbors whispered, and officials wrote their reports as if it were just another case. But for her, time stopped the moment she realized she was the only one still breathing. Before that night, her world was ordinary and warm, filled with small arguments at the dinner table, quiet laughter, and plans that felt certain. Her parents believed in hard work. Her siblings believed in tomorrow. And she believed that family meant safety, when everything was taken from them: home, dignity. Future people assumed her story was over too. They were wrong. Because while they took everything they could see, they missed one thing that would change everything. The part of her that remembered, the part that refused to forget, and the part that was quietly learning how to survive. She stood at the edge of the empty road where her childhood home once stood, the wind brushing dust across the cracked pavement like it was trying to erase the past. For years she had imagined this moment coming back, not as the scared girl who watched her world collapse, but as a woman who carried every memory like a weapon. The house was gone, now replaced by a hollow lot and a rusted fence, yet she could still see it. Clearly, the porch where her mother used to sit at sunset. The window where her father waved every morning before work, the laughter that once filled the air. They took all of that from her in a single night, or so they thought. Her name was Eleanor Carter. And the town remembered her only as a tragedy, the girl whose family lost everything when powerful. People decided they were expendable. Back then, Eleanor had been 16, hiding in a closet while voices argued in the living room, while fear pressed so hard against her chest she thought it would stop her heart. She remembered the sound of glass breaking, her mother screaming her name, her father shouting for her to run. She remembered running barefoot into the woods behind the house, branches tearing at her skin, lungs burning, not daring to look back as flames climbed into the night sky. By morning, her family was gone, and the official story was neat and simple: an accident, a fire. No one to blame, but accidents don't come with threats whispered weeks earlier. Accidents don't follow months of pressure, unpaid debts that were never real, and men in expensive suits showing up uninvited. Eleanor learned very quickly that truth meant nothing when money and power were involved. The town moved on, the case was closed, and she was sent away, shuffled through relatives and foster homes, carrying grief that no one wanted to hear about. What no one noticed was that Eleanor never stopped listening. She never stopped remembering names, faces, patterns. While others saw a broken girl, she quietly rebuilt herself piece by piece. She studied late into the night, not just school books, but people, how they lied, how they hid guilt behind confidence, how systems worked, and who controlled them. She learned patience, the kind that grows when you have nothing left to lose and everything to wait for. Years passed, and the men responsible for destroying her family climbed higher. They became respected figures: business owners, donors, community leaders. Their faces smiled from billboards and charity events. They talked about family, values, about protecting the town's future. Eleanor watched all of it from a distance, never close enough to be seen, never far enough to forget. She kept every article, every interview, every small contradiction. While they built their empires, she built something quieter: leverage. Now, standing on that empty lot, she felt neither anger nor fear, just clarity. She wasn't here to burn anything down blindly. Revenge without purpose was just noise. What she wanted was truth dragged into the light so brightly that no amount of money could push it back into the shadows. They had taken her family, her childhood, her sense of safety, but they had missed one thing. They had missed her. She reached into her coat pocket and touched the small flash drive hanging from a chain around her neck. Inside it was years of evidence documents that didn't add up, recordings no one knew existed. Proof collected patiently and legally. She had learned the rules so she could break them without being caught. This wasn't about violence, it was about exposure. About making sure the same town that once turned away would finally be forced to look. As she walked back toward her car, headlights swept across her face, and for a split second, she wondered if someone recognized her, but the car passed without slowing. To them, she was just another stranger. That anonymity was her greatest advantage. She drove into town, past familiar streets that now felt foreign, and parked near the old courthouse. Tomorrow, everything would begin, not with a confrontation, not with a threat, but with a single envelope delivered to the right place. Inside that envelope was the first crack in a wall that had stood for decades, and once the crack started, they wouldn't stop. Eleanor started the engine and looked straight ahead, her reflection staring back at her from the windshield, calm, steady, unafraid. They had taken everything from her family, but they had missed the one thing that could destroy them. The girl who survived grew stronger and came back not for mercy, but for justice. She didn't cry when they sealed the front door of the house with yellow tape. She didn't cry when the bank truck came and took away the furniture, or when neighbors whispered and pretended not to stare. What broke her wasn't the loss itself, but the way it happened, how quickly everything was stripped away. How easily powerful people erased her family's name from the town as if it had never mattered. Standing alone in the empty living room, she realized grief had hardened into something sharper. Memory after memory replayed in her mind. Her father working late nights, her mother balancing bills at the kitchen table, the quiet pride they had in never owing anyone, and yet here she was, holding a single box of belongings, knowing that someone had planned this downfall long before it happened. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place people passed without noticing. It was there, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and strangers' footsteps, that she began to piece together what had really happened. Late nights were spent reading old emails, legal notices, and contracts her father had saved obsessively. At first, the paperwork looked like noise, technical language meant to confuse and intimidate, but slowly patterns emerged. Numbers didn't add up. Signatures appeared where they shouldn't have. Companies that had once praised her father suddenly turned hostile, coordinated in their timing, unified in their silence. This wasn't bad luck, it was deliberate. She took a job at a diner, not because she needed the money immediately, but because it gave her access to people. Businessmen talked when they thought no one important was listening. Lawyers relaxed their caution over coffee refills. She learned how to listen without reacting, how to store details away quietly. One name kept resurfacing, always spoken carefully, always followed by a pause. A man who never appeared in documents directly, but whose influence shaped outcomes behind closed doors. She remembered hearing her father mention that name once, years ago, with unease in his voice, at night. Exhaustion fought with determination. There were moments she almost gave up. Moments where the weight of loss pressed so heavily on her chest that breathing felt like work. But then she would remember her mother's last words to her: "Truth doesn't disappear just because people bury it." That sentence became her anchor. She began meeting with a retired accountant who had once worked for her father's firm, a man who had nothing left to lose. He confirmed her suspicions quietly, sliding photocopied ledgers across a table as if they were forbidden artifacts. Fraud, asset stripping, a carefully engineered collapse designed to force her family out and seize what remained. Fear crept in when she realized how deep it went. These weren't reckless criminals. They were respected figures with polished reputations. Going after them openly would destroy her. Before it touched them, so she chose patience instead. She studied, learned the system that had crushed her family, and started to use it the same way they had slowly, invisibly. She enrolled in night classes, law and finance, sitting in the back, absorbing everything. No one noticed her, and that was exactly what she wanted. Months passed, then years. On the surface, she looked like someone who had moved on, new job, new city, new name used casually among acquaintances, but underneath, every step was calculated. She filed small, harmless requests for information. She built relationships with journalists hungry for real stories but smart enough to wait. She gathered proof the way others gathered power, quietly, relentlessly. Each document, each recorded conversation, felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been taken. One evening, as she reviewed a folder thick with evidence, she realized the truth with startling clarity. They had taken her family's home, their savings, their reputation. They had taken almost everything, but they had missed one thing. They had underestimated her, and in doing so, they had given her time to understand them, time to prepare, time to strike in a way they would never see coming. She learned the truth in pieces, never all at once, as if the town itself was reluctant to confess. It started with an old newspaper clipping tucked inside a library book she hadn't meant to borrow. A yellowed column describing a tragic but unavoidable loss that mentioned her family's name. Only once misspelled. The language was careful, almost kind, and that was what made her stomach turn. Kind words had been used to bury ugly decisions. As she read, she felt something shift inside her, not anger yet, but clarity. Someone had chosen comfort over truth, and that choice had cost her family everything. She began to ask questions the way careful people do, indirectly, over coffee or while standing in line, letting others talk first. People remembered more than they admitted. A former clerk recalled late-night meetings at the municipal building, lights burning long after offices closed. A retired contractor spoke of permits rushed through without inspections, of corners cut because deadlines mattered more than safety. Every detail fit together like a map she hadn't known she was drawing. It pointed not to one villain, but to a system that protected itself by sacrificing those who had the least power to fight back. At night, she wrote everything down, names, dates, small contradictions. She didn't trust memory alone, she trusted patterns. When she noticed that the same 3 surnames kept reappearing on donation plaques, campaign signs, and the new development that stood where her childhood home once had, she circled them hard enough to tear the page. The realization didn't bring relief, it brought responsibility. If she knew, she couldn't unknow it, and if she could connect the dots, others could too if someone was brave enough to show them how. Her plan wasn't loud, it was patient. She requested public records that no one had bothered to request in years. She filed them politely, with a smile, and waited. When documents arrived, she cross-referenced them against archived emails obtained through a Freedom of Information request. Dates overlapped, signatures repeated. A safety report had been altered after the fact. She felt the weight of it then, the solid proof pressing into her palms. This wasn't rumor or grief speaking. This was evidence. She tested the waters by sharing a single, harmless discrepancy with a local journalist known for human interest stories. He listened, nodded, and said it was probably a clerical error. She thanked him and left, disappointed but not surprised. The town had trained itself to look away. That meant she needed a different approach. Not outrage first, understanding first. She started attending council meetings, sitting in the back, learning the rhythms of power, who interrupted whom, whose jokes landed, whose questions never got answered. One evening, A councilman she'd circled noticed her. His smile was quick and professional. The kind meant to end conversations before they began. "Can I help you?" he asked after the meeting. She met his eyes and told him she was researching the town's history. He relaxed, offered a rehearsed version of events, and in doing so, revealed more than he intended. He used the same phrases she'd read in the altered report. She went home and wrote those phrases down verbatim. Language, she realized, was a fingerprint. As weeks passed, whispers reached her. People were asking who she was, why she cared. She felt the risk then, the thin ice under every step. But fear didn't stop her. It sharpened her. She backed up files in 3 places. She shared copies with someone she trusted outside the town. She set a rule for herself. No confrontation without witnesses, no accusations without documents. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage, it was accountability fueled by restraint. The turning point came when she found a photograph mislabeled in the town archive. It showed the construction site days before the incident that destroyed her family. A safety barrier missing, a warning sign turned face down. In the background, unmistakable even after all these years, stood one of the circled men, speaking on a phone, watching the work continue. She stared at the image until dawn. Grief and resolve braiding together into something unbreakable. This was the one thing they had. Missed not her anger, not her loss, but her persistence. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. The kind of steady that comes from knowing exactly what must be done next. She closed her notebook, powered down her laptop, and stepped outside into the morning air. The town looked the same as it always had. Quiet and polite, unaware of the reckoning approaching at a measured pace. She wasn't here to take everything from them. She was here to give the truth back to the people who had paid for silence with their lives. And to a future that deserved better than carefully chosen lies. The night she decided to act, the house felt heavier than ever, as if the walls themselves remembered everything that had been taken. She sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where her family once laughed over simple meals. And spread out the documents she had collected over months of quiet investigation. Bank records, old news clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs formed a messy map of betrayal. Every name circled in red ink represented someone who had smiled at her parents while slowly stripping them of their dignity, their business, and eventually their safety. She wasn't driven by anger alone anymore. It was clarity that guided her now. She finally understood how carefully everything had been orchestrated, and how close she had always been to the truth. She replayed her last conversation with her father in her mind. The way his voice had cracked when he told her to keep going no matter what happened to him. At the time, she hadn't fully understood what he meant. Now she did. He had known they were losing everything, not just money or property, but protection. Powerful people had turned against them, and once that happened, there was no room for mistakes. She folded the papers neatly and placed them into a worn leather folder. The one her mother used to carry important documents. It felt symbolic, like carrying a piece of her family with her as she stepped into the next phase. The first stop was the abandoned office building on the edge of town, a place that had once been the heart of her family's business. It stood dark and forgotten, but she knew it held answers. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, and her footsteps echoed through empty hallways. She moved carefully, guided by memory, until she reached a back room that most people didn't know existed. Hidden behind a loose panel in the wall was a small safe, one her father had installed years ago just in case. Her hands shook as she entered the code he had taught her as a child, disguised back then as a game. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing files she had never seen before. Contracts, recordings, and signed agreements confirmed what she had suspected. Her family hadn't failed. They had been targeted. She felt a wave of grief wash over her, followed by something steadier and stronger. This wasn't just her story anymore, it was evidence. Proof. She copied everything onto a secure drive and carefully returned the originals to the safe. For the first time in years, she felt one step ahead instead of constantly behind. Over the next few days, she began to move quietly through the town, reconnecting with people who had once been close to her family. Some were afraid to talk, their voices low and nervous, eyes darting around as if the past could overhear them. Others, burdened by guilt, shared what they knew. Piece by piece, the story came together. Her family had been framed, manipulated into legal traps, and isolated until they had no one left to defend them. The people responsible had counted on silence and time to bury the truth. One evening, she received an anonymous message on her phone. "You're asking the wrong questions. Stop before you get hurt." She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening, but instead of fear, she felt confirmation. They knew she was close. She saved the message and backed it up, adding it to her growing collection of proof. This was no longer just about restoring her family's name, it was about exposing a system that thrived on intimidation. She met with a journalist from a neighboring city, someone known for taking on stories others were too afraid to touch. Sitting across from him in a quiet cafe, she laid everything out. Not with emotion, but with facts. He listened carefully, occasionally glancing at the documents, his expression growing more serious by the minute. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "If this is real, it changes everything." She nodded. She already knew it did, as the story began to take shape. She felt the weight of what she was doing. There would be consequences. The people who destroyed her family wouldn't go down quietly, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. She had allies now, and more importantly, she had the truth. Late that night, as she walked home under a sky full of restless clouds, she realized what they had missed all along. They had taken her family's home, their money, their reputation, but they had underestimated her, and that one mistake was about to cost them everything. She stood at the edge of the courtroom hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of voices behind the heavy wooden doors, her heart beating steadily but without fear. Years ago, this place would have terrified her. Back then, she had been just a girl watching her family lose everything: home, reputation, safety, and finally their lives, one by one, in ways that were disguised as accidents and bad luck. Now she was a woman who had learned patience the hard way. Every sleepless night, every quiet tear, every memory she refused to forget had led her here. The trial had begun weeks earlier, and slowly, carefully, the truth was unraveling. The powerful men who once laughed at her family's destruction now sat stiff in their chairs, their confidence cracking with each witness. She had not rushed this moment. She had spent years gathering documents, recording conversations, earning trust, and letting people underestimate her. They thought she was harmless because she never raised her voice. They never realized silence could be sharper than anger. As she took the stand, the room fell quiet. She spoke calmly, clearly, never once letting emotion overpower her words. She described how her father had refused to sign a fraudulent deal, how her mother had begged officials for help, and how every door had been slammed shut because the wrong people held power. She explained how fires, thefts, and false charges destroyed her family's name, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. Her voice never shook, but every sentence carried weight. The defense tried to discredit her, calling her story emotional, personal, unreliable. She expected that. What they didn't expect were the documents she presented next: bank transfers, signed letters, hidden ownership records. and recordings that connected every tragedy back to the same small group of men. Faces in the courtroom changed, whispers spread, even the judge leaned forward. She watched as the men who once controlled everything avoided her eyes. One of them stared at the floor, another clenched his fists, and the third tried to interrupt, but it was too late. The truth no longer needed her anger. It stood on its own. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, shouting questions she didn't answer. She walked past them slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside her. Not victory, not revenge, but release. She hadn't destroyed anyone. She had simply refused to let the truth stay buried. That night, she visited the small cemetery where her family rested. She placed flowers gently, speaking softly into the quiet air. She told them she hadn't become what hurt them. She told them she had protected the one thing their enemies missed: her strength, her memory, and her refusal to disappear. As she walked away, the world felt different, not kinder, not easier, but honest. And for the first time since everything was taken from her family, she felt whole again. She didn't come back to the town to be seen. She came back to finish what had been started the night her family lost everything. The people who took her home, her safety, and her childhood had grown comfortable over the years. They built businesses, earned respect, raised families of their own. To everyone else, they were pillars of the community. To her, they were the reason her mother stopped smiling, the reason her father died early from stress and heartbreak, the reason her younger brother never believed the world could be fair. And now, after years of silence and preparation, she was close enough to feel the weight of the ending press against her chest. She had learned something crucial in all these years away. Revenge didn't always need fists or fire. Sometimes the most devastating justice came quietly, methodically. With patience sharper than anger, she spent weeks watching routines, tracing money, following patterns that others ignored. She discovered that the same people who once took everything from her family were still taking from others through fraud, threats, and manipulation hidden behind clean suits and polite smiles. They hadn't changed. They had only learned to hide better. One night, sitting alone in a rented apartment, she spread documents across the floor. Bank records, emails, signed agreements forged under pressure, proof that could destroy reputations built over decades. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the realization that she now held the power they once held over her family. The difference was simple. She would not abuse it. She would expose it. The first collapse came quietly. A sudden investigation announced in the morning news, auditors at offices, phones ringing unanswered. By the second week, whispers spread through town. By the third, names were being spoken out loud, followed by disbelief. Not him. He's such a good man. She watched from a distance as denial slowly turned into shock, then anger, then shame. One of them tried to run. Another tried to shift blame. One showed up at her door late at night, older now, smaller somehow, eyes filled with panic when he recognized her. He begged. He said he had changed. He said it was just business back then. She listened in silence, letting every word fall into the space where her childhood used to be. When he finished, she told him calmly that she hadn't come for apologies, she had come for truth. Then she closed the door. As the cases unfolded, other families began to speak. Stories surfaced that sounded painfully familiar: homes lost, lives uprooted, futures rewritten without consent. For the first time, she realized her pain had never been isolated. It had been multiplied, buried under years of fear, and now it was being heard. The town changed after that, not overnight, but slowly. Murals replaced boarded windows, new faces filled old buildings. Her mother, who had once sworn never to return, stood beside her one afternoon, watching children play in the same park where grief had once swallowed their lives. Her mother squeezed her hand and whispered, "You brought us back without destroying yourself." That was when she finally cried. She didn't stay, she never planned to. Closure didn't mean roots, it meant release. Before leaving, she visited her family's old street one last time. The house was gone, replaced by something new, something ordinary. And for the first time, that felt okay as she drove away at sunrise. She understood the one thing they had missed when they took everything from her family. They missed her resilience. They missed the quiet strength that grows when someone survives loss and chooses purpose over hatred. They missed the fact that broken families don't always stay broken sometimes. They rebuild into something unstoppable, and if this story moved you, if it made you think about justice, resilience, and the power of quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional stories like this. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them.